We've come to that stage of the year when the towing jobs have finished. You'll have seen we were doing a bit of rolling the other day. That's now done. This is my normal hitch, which, as you can see, I've got a clevis pin hitch welded to a piece of angle which goes on the 9-hole drawbar, which actually works really well. That's now got to come off because the next job is to put the saw bench on, which is always a bit of a job, but let's have a go. Taking this hitch off usually involves the loss of a certain amount of blood, but the weather is, although it's been quite decent recently, it's been hellishly cold the last couple of days, and it's not very good for old fingers, but let's give this a go. As you can see, this is quite a different. There's the 9-hole drawbar and this regalia which I put on here, which works very well. The drawback with it is very heavy and it's quite difficult to put on. Trying to get everything balanced up and putting it on, but taking it off is slightly easier than putting it on. So that's the first job. Next job is to take off these stay bars here, which again, you always want sort of more hands. If we're all designed with 2 more arms, it would make life so much easier, but there we have them. This is where they're supposed to go in accordance with the Ferguson manual. I saw a bloke at a show last year sometime and he got them on here. And swore blind that was the right place for them to go on the split pin that goes through here. I tried to explain it wasn't. He wasn't having it under any circumstances, and he looked at me as if I was some kind of mad person. So I thought I'd leave him to it. But it's surprising how many experts there are about, but that's where they're supposed to go. So let's just whip those off. It can go back in there. Can go back in there because I'm not going to need that for the saw bench. And here we have the trusty Ferguson spanner, which no Fergie owner should be without, because it fits everything. Well, it fits most things. It gets this off. Now this is the standard cover for the PTO, and that's got the standard PTO in it. But as you'll see in a minute, when I'm using the saw bench, I've got a slight problem, and you'll see what that problem is in a minute. Now one of the tricks of the saw bench, it fits on here, the pulley, so these need to come off. This one I just swing round the lower bar here. This one I take off, and again you'll see the reason why that's taken off, because there's a lug sticking out there, and that lug has an amazing habit of clobbering the pulley, and my pulley has shown where that's happened, not in my lifetime, but when someone else had it and they had to weld a lump in. But that one needs to come out, or this pin needs to come off here completely. But I'll show you that in a minute. Well, here's the pulley. Now those that you know about these things will know this is not a Ferguson TEA pulley. This is a pulley off it actually came off a 135. I think it fits the 35 as well. But it's not a Ferguson one, a TEA pulley. The TEA one has a bracket that sits on the back. This is smaller, the gear. It's got a little bracket that sits on the back, but it does the same thing as this. So this came off a 135 originally, So you've got this bracket here that bolts on, and this is where the saw bench sits. So with a saw bench, if you're not aware, you certainly use these pins for the lower links, but the top link goes through there, as opposed to there. It doesn't go through the top of the 3-point linkage. And it's interesting, the sort of dynamics of the saw bench. When you lift it up, it tips the whole thing up, because this is obviously much shorter and is coming off about here. This pulley works absolutely fine with the TA20. The problem is that spline is different to this one. So what I put in here is a conversion sleeve, which is a pretty disgusting thing, and that just sits in there, and it adapts the larger spline to the smaller one which is on there, and it works perfectly. It's okay. So the one thing with a pulley, it's a devil of a thing to put on, because like everything else, it's fiendishly heavy, and trying to get it on, these nuts here have got to come undone, and it all has to go on and do the nuts up, and trying to get that all aligned and onto the spline, rocking this again with only 2 hands rather than the preferred 4-handed person, that would make life easier. Now, the reason I mentioned earlier about this chain is if that chain is left, if this bracket is left on, it collides with the pulley, and hence the fact there's a piece missing, and that's because that has clobbered that, and you'll see that when we put it on. It all comes rather close, but it's okay. It works fine. It's not quite as it should be, but it's good enough. Right, now the next task is to, a bit of a camera move, is just to get this lot off. So mind your ears. Unfortunately, putting these nuts back on is not, you can't use the rattler for that. We've got to use a spanner, because as you'll see, it's a bit of a tight fit. Washers on each of those, and getting this off. Oh, there we are. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes they don't come off so easily. Hang on a minute, let's get something to... Get a big persuader. It's not entirely unwilling, but some years you do this and it just comes off, there we are, dead easily. Sometimes it fights every inch of the way. Business. So this one here just goes, I just set that over the bar there. I don't run on the road with the saw bench, it's only just from out of the workshop into the garden. This one here is the one, that pin's got to come out and take this one out to prevent the damage which we had before. So the next job is just to take this chain off, which is Question of taking the split pin out, taking the clevis out, and we can just put those to one side, hoping we don't lose them. I'll replace that split pin, but I'll find another one. So that one, we don't need that. That can come out of the way. So we're getting near to lifting up. There's an oil fill on the back of the pulley, which is this plug here, which you take, just undo the plug and just check the oil levels up to the bottom of the threads, which I've already done. So that's ready to rock and roll. Now this is where the cursing and swearing starts. So if you're of a nervous disposition, you might have to go and make a cup of tea. I've taken the precaution of putting my overalls on now, mainly because my wife told me my trousers were all covered in oil. So what I've done is to move the pulley here and then to put it up onto a trolley jack, which I've had moderate success with in the past, but you never quite know. It's not flat underneath, so you have to sort of hold it, but it does take some of the weight out. So I'm just, as you can see, jacking this up to try and get the holes. So you've got it, the holes have got to be aligned, and so is the spline. So how are we doing? We're about sort of nearly getting somewhere near it, I think. Aha! Right, that's got the spline lined up. So I think if I just sort of give it a bit of a thing. Oh, there we are. A bit too much pressure up on the trolley jack. Right. Phew. That's got it in. The problem now is, of course, the studs off the back of the diff. You can't get a rough spanner on, so it's a question of doing it with a spanner, which I've got here. Unfortunately, my microphone's just packed up, so I'm voicing over this a little bit, so it'll sound slightly different. As you can see, the studs are not that long coming out the back of the diff, so the gap between the end of the stud and that red oxide frame is about the width of a nut. So there's a certain amount of jiggling has to go on to get the washer and the nut in there. So I'm sliding it forwards and backwards on the stud. That just gives me enough room to get the nut, the first nut on, and get it to bite. The top two are the worst, and the bottom two aren't quite so bad. But once you get them to start to bite onto the thread, then you can get a spanner onto them and gradually tighten the whole thing home. But this is the penalty of having the 135 pulley rather than the T20 one, where the bracket is already built into the casting on the front. Right, the nuts are all done up tight, but I just wanted to show you, see how it's running nice and freely, which is good. I just want to show you how that notch in the pulley has come about. Not in my ownership, but it fits directly into that lug that we looked at earlier. If that comes across, that's where it's knocked the lump of the pulley out. So you do need to be a bit careful. And that bracket we took off, that needs to stay off. When the saw bench is on, the lower arms are far enough apart that it isn't a problem. But when you lift the bench up, the trouble with the Fergie hydraulics is that they're if you've got your pump running, you've also got your PTO running. So of course when you're lifting the saw bench up, this is spinning which it feels sort of slightly dangerous, which it probably is. But of course, if this is spinning and this just moves a little bit, that will clonk there and will notch out. There's a lot of these, you see them for sale, and they've always got a bit knocked out. But it's just something to bear in mind. So take that off and it's fine. So the next job really is to get the saw bench, but that's saw bench attached. But at the moment it's in the back of the shed. I need to pull it out. But that's stage one.